各位佛友，大家阿弥陀佛。我再一次问大家阿弥陀佛。再一次，大家阿弥陀佛。Okay, did you all pay attention to what you just heard? 3 Amitofos. What's that all about? It's not immediately evident if you don't understand the Mahayana perspective. If you haven't come from the Mahayana perspective, that might seem a very strange ritual. But I guarantee anywhere in Buddhist East Asia, regardless of whether you're speaking Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Tibetan, if you put your palms together and happily greet another Asian Buddhist with Amitabha, you're going to get that in return. The name of the Buddha, Amitabha. This is guaranteed. Why is this true? In Buddhist East Asia, the name Amitabha has become very commonplace. Since the Tang Dynasty, this sound, these 4 words, Amitofo or Namo Amitofo, homage to the Buddha Amitabha, the Buddha of limitless light, has become the dominant form of practice. Now, how deeply has Buddhist culture, particularly a Buddha whose orientation is the suffering of death and ending its suffering, how deeply has Buddhist culture intertwined, has merged with the culture of East Asia, can be seen in the use of this phrase. In, let's say, Taiwan, a place that I'm very familiar with, maybe also the same in Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore. In a Buddhist family, if you answer the phone, you say, Amitofo, when you answer the phone. So Amitabha becomes hello, right? And if you are a Buddhist in East Asia and you're saying the conversation is over, what do you say? 是, Amitofo, 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 Amitofo. Goodbye. Amitofo means goodbye as well. If you see something scary, you encounter something on the street that's terrifying, you go, Amitofo. So Amitabha becomes, oh my goodness. At the same time, right? Now I'm told, I don't know if this is true, I'm told in Hong Kong that it's exactly the opposite. When people see the Sangha, instead of saying what they do in Taiwan, 师父 Amitofo, right, which is hello to the Sangha, they say, Amitofo, here comes a monk. Amitabha. I'm told. I just pass that on. I don't know if that's the case, but often
monkeys in the hall, you know.
Is that right? Yeah. It's often the case because there will be a hand reaching out for a red envelope following the monk, you know, or preceding the monk, I guess. So, now there's one guarantee. You can really see how much the name Amitabha has entered Western culture if you watch any kung fu film that features a villain monk. I'll give you a clue. You can see the villain monk has eyebrows that look like squirrel tails, you know, big bushy eyebrows, and he's got beads around his neck that would choke a horse. The beads are this big, right? And he's got this big staff, usually the monk's staff, it's really big. And if you see these 3 signs, you know he's probably going to die by the 3rd act. And what does he say? He says, right? That's the buffoon monk, who you can tell by his that he's probably a loser. So anyway, this phrase has a multi-purpose function. And yet what is it? It's the name of a Buddha. It's the name of the Buddha Amitabha. My point is to say that this particular aspect of the Dharma has permeated East Asian Buddhist culture so deeply that people take every opportunity to say the name. We don't let it slip. We want to recite the name of the Buddha Amitabha at every opportunity. I was speaking to a believing Buddhist laywoman the other day who said that she's already a grandmother. She's has been a Buddhist for a long time, but in the last few years, she has undertaken a practice of reciting the name Amitabha 10,000 times a day. And she does it. She's got a little digital counter. Right? So, and she's not unusual. There's a whole community that supports this kind of practice. How interesting. What a phenomena. Isn't this interesting? Why are people reciting a Buddha's name to say hello, to say goodbye, to say, oh my goodness, to greet a monk, or to indicate an identity? I think it's because, and there are scholastic reasons why. It's interesting to note that in the Tang Dynasty, before the Tang Dynasty, Amitabha was not the cult of, or the practice of preference. It was Maitreya. Maitreya worship dominated the time of Daoan and Daosheng and the monks of the 4th century, 5th century. So there was a major turnaround. And I'm going to suggest that there's a historical reason for it, which was life was hard. Life was hard, particularly in China, where this became the dominant form of practice. For the average citizen, for Lao Baixing, there was no end to disasters. There was natural disasters, man-made disasters, a succession of floods, droughts, wars, bandit uprisings. Sometimes the soldiers and the bandits were indistinguishable. They would take off their hat and become bandits, and then put their hat back on and become soldiers. Plagues came, locusts came, tax protectors, tax collectors, forced labor, an endless stream of suffering impinging on your body, which made life, by and large, miserable. The notion of a pure land, the land called Sukhavati, the land of utmost happiness, created by the wholesome vows of a kind-hearted monk whose name was Dhammakara Fazang, Dharma treasury, sounded pretty good. It sounded like a really attractive alternative to what people were facing day in and day out. And how did you get there? Namo Ami Tofo. I return, I rely on the Buddha of limitless light. That sounded pretty good. So people did. People recited. Now, to take a step back into a scholastic perspective, you could say that this is a sacred story, if we borrow the language of theology and folklore, that this is a sacred story. Amitabha worship and the understanding of the Buddha Amitabha is essentially traced to 3 sutras that are not affirmed in other forms of Buddhism. We want to put that up front right away. There are 3 sutras that told the story of Amitabha and his vows. And essentially he said, let there be a pure land where there's no suffering. And people who want to go there at the end of life need only recite my name. That was the notion. So sounded good, and people did, and it became very popular. Now, over the years, over the millennia, over the thousands of years plus, accounts flourished of believers who recited the name of the Buddha Amitabha and who then, at the time of death, went off to rebirth joyfully. Joyfully, not in grief, not in pain, not in fear, but often sitting upright, reciting the Buddha's name with a smile on their face and a heart full of light. Many, many stories. There's the Jingdu Lü, right? There's thick books divided into bhikshus, bhikshunis, upasakas, upasikas, and others who, at the time of death, recited the Buddha's name and went off to rebirth. Thick, gathered testimonies over the years. And you may think, yeah, old stories, that's great. 21st century, what about us? Well, I'd like to offer to you personal experience. When I was working on my doctorate in the early 90s, I would lecture in Burlingame, California. This is the northern end of Silicon Valley. My parish, if you will, is the East Bay of the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. I spend a lot of time in San Jose, Cupertino, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Menlo Park, Palo Alto. And this is in Burlingame. And on Sunday mornings, I would give a sutra lecture. And I always prepared a story or two, because stories are like dessert. You know, if you're willing to sit through the sutra, you'll knowing there's dessert coming, you'll listen to the sutra. There's a story coming. So one day, I had a big project, and I didn't get my story together. I hadn't found it yet. And so here I am, got 20 minutes to go. It's the end of the sutra lecture, time for dessert, time for the story. And I didn't have a good story that connected. And so I took a risk. Now, my experience with Asian Buddhist audiences, particularly Chinese and Vietnamese, is if you ask for folks to give an opinion, if you ask for folks to raise their hand and say something on their own, the first response is, they don't do what Westerners do. Westerners, pick on me, I got an opinion, ask me, okay? Right? By and large, that's pretty much the case. So I'm used to that, and so you work with that. So at this, I had no story, and I thought, well, let's try it. So I said, now we've been talking about Pure Land practices today. Is there anybody here, anybody today, who maybe has a story, who maybe has an experience with what we say Wangsheng, going off to rebirth? 6 hands shot up in the air from people named Zhang and Li and Chen and Lin. Call on me, I have a story. Well, sure, Lin 先生, 你先说嘛. Mr. Lin says, couldn't believe it. Now, who is Mr. Lin? He's a Silicon Valley high-tech engineer. He's a whiz kid, right? He graduated from Caltech and is earning, 6 or 7 figure salary working at Sun Microsystems. So he says, yeah, oh, he couldn't believe it. We live in a condo down in Santa Clara, and Mrs. Lee was our next door neighbor. She was old, everybody liked her. We would see her when we took the garbage out, kind of, where we'd smell her when she was cooking, and she's a vegetarian, we all knew that. And we could sometimes we would hear at night, she was hitting her wooden fish and reciting Namo Amitabha. We all knew that. She was a nice lady. We liked her a lot, but we didn't, I was busy and my wife was busy. But we didn't hear from her for about 3 days, and we noticed that nobody had taken the garbage out. So we were worried, we were concerned, and so we kind of, knocked on the door and didn't hear, so the door was open, we pushed our way in, and we went in and found her on the bed, sitting upright, wearing her Buddhist robes, with her wooden fish in her hand, a smile on her face, stone cold dead. And there was this fragrance in the room. She had this gentle smile, sitting there with her wooden fish. She had died, happily. We couldn't believe it, because we'd heard about this Pure Land. We'd been coming here for a couple years, but I'd never seen it. Amazing. And everybody in the room goes, oh. Right? Okay, so now Mr. Wang over here is Miss Wang. Miss Wang says, yes. Miss Wang also is a coder, and she writes code for HP, for Hewlett-Packard, and she says, oh, unbelievable. She says, incredible. She says, me too. We live in Cupertino, and she said it was our grandma. She came over from Taiwan, and we put her in the back room, and she's so happy because she's got her Amitabha. And we're kind of Buddhist, we're kind of Buddhist, Christmas and Easter Buddhists, we go Buddha's birthday, and but we didn't really think much about it until one day Grandma said, I want you all to come, call all the kids, get them all here. I'm saying goodbye. What? Grandma, aren't you happy here? Besides, you haven't bought a ticket. You don't even have a passport anymore, No. She said, bring them all here. So all the kids gathered in, all the aunts and the uncles and all the kids. And here she was, sitting on her bed, 92 years old, radiant smile on her face, wearing her Buddhist robes and saying, you all be good. I want you to all do good, avoid all evil, purify your minds. I want you to recite the name of the Buddha Amitabha and try your best. Don't worry about me. I'm fine. Now help me out. Can you say Amitabha? Amitabha? She closed her eyes and with a smile on her face, died. We were blown away, he said. And everybody in the room hearing the story went, yeah. How do you say it? What do you say? Tell me. Right? So here are 2 stories from very with it people who live in the fast lane who were not necessarily believers or Buddhists, but having personally encountered people who had a special quality regarding faith, vows, and practice in the Buddha Amitabha at the end of life had something to say. Dylan Thomas, right? Rage, rage against the dying of the light. No raging against the dying of the light. The light is dying, the light is growing, because they're bringing the light in their mind. They're bringing the name Amitabha, the limitless light, the Buddha of limitless light and limitless lifespan, Amitayus, into their hearts. No darkness to rage against, no rage. Joy, expectation, anticipation. Startled me, I must say. And I thought, gee, I should come unprepared more often. These are great stories. That was a wonderful lecture. So, the other thing about the Pure Land that appealed is the egalitarian nature of the Buddha's teaching on Amitabha. There's a teaching called Sangan Pube. The three different natures are all equally gathered in, which is to say, salvation via Amitabha's vows was guaranteed to people of superior faculties, people who were both intelligent and blessed, people of middling faculties, like most of us, who have, some faith and some doubt, and also people of what are called challenged faculties, xiagunderen, people who are of rude belief. All they need do, according to the teaching, is recite the name of the Buddha, Namo Amitabha, a minimum of 10 times. And at the end of life, they too can be reborn from a pure lotus flower in the land of utmost happiness, Sukhavati. Okay, so that's the story. And certainly, if you're encountering it for the first time, you'll have questions. How come other scriptures don't talk about this? Good question. But I will say that if you go from experience, and so much of the Dharma arises from experience, not from theory, if you go from experience, these are compelling stories. When I saw them with my own eyes, the people who were scientifically skillful and who saw grandma go off to rebirth in front of them, there was a sense of there's more to learn, isn't there? We don't know it all yet, do we? There's more to learn. What a compelling story. So what's the difference between faith and no faith? It functions differently. There's a different function between faith and no faith. Some of you may or may not know, in Silicon Valley, there's a phenomenon, what are called high-tech robberies. And it's not that robbers use high-tech, it's that robbers steal high-tech chips and components and things and resell them. One of our lay members, one of Master Xuanhua's disciples, a man named William Zheng, who is no longer with us, unfortunately. William Zheng owned a company called Wintech, and William was an amazingly devout disciple. Through him, many of his employees met the Buddha Dharma and became wholesome people. And there was a tragedy associated with Wintech that happened about, I guess it was about 8 or 9 years ago, which is on a Saturday afternoon, William, his vice president, and his secretary were working late on a Saturday. And as they were heading out the door, in through the front gate came 2 SUVs with guns blazing. They were high-tech bandits coming to hit Wintech and steal the shipment of wafers. Chips are made of wafers. Wafers are silicon with the circuits already cut in. Then you cut them fine and put them into 46s or Pentiums or whatever, what have you. And Wintech had just gotten a shipment of chips, very valuable. And so the robbers, having been tipped off, were rolling in just like out of a Western with guns blazing. They killed the security guard who stood at the front gate to keep people like this out. They shot him dead on the spot, came rolling into the parking lot. Now, every Silicon Valley company these days has a high level of security, and so did Wintech. And as the robbers are rolling in the parking lot, the vice president had already gone out into the parking lot. He was heading towards his car at the end of the workday. William and his secretary were back by the door. So William shouted, "Come back, we'll shut the door." The vice president tried to be a hero and make a break for it, and he was shot dead in the parking lot. William and the secretary jumped back inside, saw that he was gone, closed the high security door, and called the police immediately. The response time for the police was 4 minutes, but the robbers saw and knew about the security. They had hoped to break through before the door was shut. They turned around and fled, leaving 2 dead people and an aborted robbery. So this was big news, and not uncommon. Now the story goes that we were asked to do the funeral because this happened inside of William's company, and the vice president had taken refuge and become a disciple just 3 months earlier. He came from Hong Kong. He was a new Buddhist, but a faithful Buddhist. His wife came from China. She was a Hongweibing, she was a Red Guard. She grew up in an atheistic, Maoist atmosphere that did not admit to faith in anything spiritual or sacred or religious. There was a certain time. China is changing rapidly, but this was one of those times. And he had married her and hoped at some point to make her into a Buddhist, but she was deeply, deeply steeped in the tradition of, the Chinese say, Wu Shen Lun, no God-ism, right, into atheism. So at the funeral, here were the vice president's parents and family reciting the Buddha's name, grief-stricken, just so sad. But you knew that they were going to recover. You knew that there was going to be a time that they would be back, because they really hoped that their son would be reborn in the Pure Land, and their brother and sister, the whole family was there. So I felt okay. It was just a matter of time for them. The wife came down. You know, there's a moment when you circle the coffin before you close it and send it off. And the wife came down, and I could see there was trouble ahead because she was all braced. She was all tight and just folding on with muscles. She got to the side of the coffin and collapsed. I'd never seen a person's bones turn to jelly before, but she collapsed on the floor, wah, just wailing. She was inconsolable. In her heart, there was no light whatsoever, because she had held all faith away with both hands to this point. And so when the time came that you need to make it through what's called Xingan, the root, the indriya, the faculty of faith, she didn't have it. The family had the faculty of faith, and for them it became the bala.